You know how language feels like it's always changing, right? New words pop up, old ones kind of fade, and we're always borrowing. Think about English grabbing sausage from French, or French later taking sandwich from English. It's this constant ebb and flow. But what if I told you there's a deeper story, like way deeper than just swapping words? A story hidden not just in old books, but well, in our genes. Today, we're doing a deep dive into this really groundbreaking study. It's using genetic evidence like actual DNA for the first time, they say, to find these systemic patterns of language change from human contact. Our mission, really, is to see how people moving around and mixing together has shaped the languages we speak today. And it turns out there are some surprising consistencies, and it challenges some things we thought we knew.
Indeed. And for centuries, our picture of how languages change through contact, it's been fuzzy, hasn't it? Largely because historical records are just incomplete. We get glimpses, but the big picture, hard to see. This new research, though, it offers a really innovative way in. It lets us sidestep some of those historical gaps by looking at something undeniable, the record of our ancestors mixing, written in our DNA.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So, the main hurdle has always been patchy historical data. We just don't have a perfect log of every time different groups met across the globe through all of history. So, how do you even start mapping language evolution on that scale?
Exactly. We see those clear examples, like your sausage and sandwich. Fun examples, right? But studying these exchanges systematically, globally, incredibly tough. And that's where genetics becomes this powerful new lens. It gives us a fresh angle. See, when populations meet, they don't just trade goods or ideas or even words. They also exchange genes. They mix. And that genetic mixing, it leaves a clear, quantifiable trace, a biological map of contact.
So, the researchers, they were at the University of Zurich, right? They basically used genetic data as a proxy, like a map of historical mingling to figure out who bumped into who.
Precisely. Anna Graf, she's a linguist and the lead author, she put it nicely. She said using genetic data let them get around the problem of missing historical records. And they found over 125 comparable cases of contact all over the world. And this wasn't, a small side project. It was huge. It combined genetics from, over 4,700 people, 558 populations, and they linked that with two major linguistic databases. It's a real cross-discipline achievement.
Wow, that is a massive data set. So, okay, they link the genes and the languages. What happened next? Was there like a big eureka moment in the lab or more of a slow burn realization?
Maybe less of a single eureka and more. Like a growing sense of, wow, look at this pattern. Imagine sifting through all that data, expecting, mostly noise. And instead, this clear, consistent signal just keeps appearing. The real aha was probably realizing that wherever they looked, ancient migrations, recent colonialism didn't matter. Genetic mixing left a surprisingly predictable linguistic footprint. What's really fascinating, technically speaking, is when they looked at genetic contact between unrelated languages. Languages with totally different origins. They found this increased probability of sharing structural features about 4% to 9%.
Wait, 4 to 9%, that sounds small, or is that actually significant in this context?
That's the key. It might sound small, but think about how incredibly diverse and complex languages are. Before this, finding any consistent quantifiable link between genetic contact and structural sharing in unrelated languages. Almost unheard of. So finding a consistent 4-9% probability isn't trivial at all. It's like finding the same subtle chemical trace in water samples from completely different rivers after they've briefly mixed downstream. It confirms that human interaction leaves this measurable linguistic residue, even between languages that started worlds apart. It really does shift how we think about the mechanics of language change. It gives us empirical tools for things that were mostly theoretical before.
Okay, so connecting that to Chiara Barbieri, one of the senior authors, you mentioned she was particularly surprised. What was it that really struck her?
Right, Barbieri, she's a population geneticist. And she said she was surprised most by how universal this effect seemed to be. Across time, across continents. Her words were something like, no matter where in the world populations come into contact, their languages become more similar to remarkably consistent extents. Just think about that. Recent colonial contacts between continents. Ancient Neolithic migrations within the same continent. The degree of linguistic similarity increase linked to genetic contact was remarkably consistent. That robustness across such different scenarios, that's what really jumped out as profound.
So the big trend is convergence languages becoming more similar through contact. But does that mean it's always straightforward, like just swapping words? Does everything eventually just blend together?
That's a really important question. And it gets to the nuance, doesn't it? What exactly gets shared and how? Balthazar Bickel, another senior author, a linguist, he points this out. While the rates of sharing are similar, the specific features involved, they vary a lot. They didn't find these universal rules, like, say, word order is always easier to borrow than consonant sounds, or vice versa. It challenges a lot of our, maybe, simpler intuitions about language transfer.
That definitely pushes back against some long-held ideas, doesn't it? The assumption that some features are just inherently more borrowable, but this study suggests maybe not.
It absolutely does. The implication is pretty strong. The social context matters, maybe more than we thought. Things like power dynamics between groups, prestige, how people feel about their own identity versus others. The study suggests these social dynamics easily override any constraints previously thought to be at play.
Mhm.
So it's less about the what's, the linguistic feature, and more about the who and why of the contact. And even more intriguing, sometimes they found the opposite effect. Not borrowing, but features becoming less similar after contact.
Less similar, like a linguistic tug of war. What does that look like? Why would languages become more different?
Exactly. Tug of war is a great way to put it. Linguists call it schismogenesis. It's when groups deliberately emphasize their differences to maintain a distinct identity. Imagine two neighboring groups. Maybe they used to sound quite similar. But if tensions rise or one group wants to assert its independence, they might actively change their speech. They might exaggerate pronunciation differences or adopt different grammatical patterns, almost like drawing a line in the sand linguistically. As Anna Graf said, while contact usually makes languages converge, sometimes it makes them diversify. So both blending together and pulling apart are part of the story. It's complex.
This ties into another area, right? This idea that some parts of language are easier to learn or borrow, especially for adults. Like, picking up new words seems easier than mastering complex grammar. Did the study look at that hierarchy?
It did. They ran meta-analyses, comparing contact effects across different linguistic domains. Things like lexical semantics, basically, word meanings and vocabulary. Then grammatical categories like tenses, plurals, gender systems, the rules of how words fit together. And phonology, the sound systems, consonants, vowels. And while, yes, sometimes things like word order or certain sounds showed higher borrowing rates aligning with expectations, the key thing was it wasn't consistently strong across all situations. The picture was messier.
So the old rules about easy versus hard borrowing, they're not hard and fast rules.
That seems to be the case. And here's what was really unexpected, kind of a curveball. They found that grammatical categories and certain lexical classes, the very things generally thought to be really tough for adults to fully acquire after childhood, these actually showed relatively high borrowabilities in some scenarios, sometimes even higher than vocabulary or basic word order.
Whoa, okay. That is surprising. Because those are the hard parts. Trying to learn German cases or Spanish verb conjugations as an adult, it's notoriously difficult. So if those complex bits are sometimes more borrowable than simple words, that really flips the script.
It absolutely does. It challenges that simple model of adults just picking up easy bits later in life.
So why? Any theories popping up from this?
Well, there are a few possibilities they raise. One idea is maybe adults can grasp the concept of a grammatical category more easily than mastering its specific form. Like understanding that another language has a past tense might be easier than learning how to form it perfectly for every verb. So the abstract idea, the category, gets borrowed conceptually. Another really interesting thought involves children.
Ah, kids, the language sponges.
Right. We often focus on adult learners in contact situations. But in really intense long-term contact, think about colonial settings or places with deep multilingualism, children might be doing more of the heavy lifting than we assumed. A child growing up in that environment, hearing multiple languages, their brain might just naturally integrate complex grammatical features from one language into another in ways an adult wouldn't. They might be the real agents of this deep structural borrowing.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Kids just absorb things differently. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. Another nuance you mentioned the study uncovered was prosody. First, what exactly is prosody, and how did it behave differently in different context situations? This sounds subtle.
Prosody is essentially the music of speech. It's the rhythm, the stress patterns on syllables, the intonation, the rise and fall of your voice. It's less about what words you use and more about how you say them. And it's often a really powerful, though sometimes subconscious, marker of identity and belonging. The study found these really interesting, almost opposite patterns for prosody. In cases of genetic contact between different geographic areas, think large-scale migrations or colonialism, often involving power imbalances, in those cases, prosody showed higher borrowing probabilities.
Higher, so people were adopting the music of the other language more readily.
It suggests that, yes, There seems to be stronger pressure for assimilation in those scenarios. Adopting the prosodic patterns, the accent, the rhythm of a dominant or incoming group could be crucial for fitting in or gaining social advantage.
Okay, that makes sense in situations with clear power differences, but what about contact within the same area, maybe between groups with more balanced power or groups trying to stay distinct?
That's where it flipped. In genetic contact within the same geographic area, prosody showed lower borrowing rates, and sometimes even a tendency towards divergence, becoming less similar.
Ah, so the opposite trend.
Exactly. Here, it seems prosody acts more as a badge of identity, a way to mark difference. In these more local, perhaps more balanced situations, groups might actively resist adopting the prosody of their neighbors. They might even exaggerate their own unique rhythm or intonation to reinforce their distinctiveness. It really highlights how social identity shapes even the most subtle musical aspects of our language.
Wow, what an incredible deep dive. It really connects the dots between our genes, our history, and the very sound of our voices. This study feels like it gives us this powerful new lens, showing consistent rates of language change from contact, but driven by this complex dance of borrowing and divergence, all shaped by social forces.
It really does paint a richer, more complex picture. And it reminds us that language contact isn't solely about language loss, although that's critically important too. It's also about how the deep structural diversity of the languages that do survive changes, sometimes eroding, sometimes diversifying in new ways. And these processes, as the studies suggest, aren't just historical footnotes. They're likely accelerating in our globalized world, especially with things like climate change potentially causing major population shifts, new contacts, new dynamics.
So, thinking about that, for you listening, consider your own world. We're all interacting more than ever, right? Online, in person. How might your own language, the way you speak, be subtly shifting? Are there features you're unconsciously borrowing? Or maybe little ways you emphasize your own way of speaking to signal who you are, where you're from? Perhaps those echoes of ancient migrations and these very modern connections are right there, shaping your words, your rhythm, in ways you've never really stopped to think about. Language, always alive, always part of us.